Ethan Cole guided his sedan into a quiet parking spot 2 blocks from his downtown Stacks and Syrup location. The morning sun had just begun to spill over the city, casting long shadows across the pavement, but the light couldn't pierce the darkness growing in Ethan's chest. 3 reports, 3 different employees, all saying the same thing. Tips had gone missing. It wasn't just numbers on a ledger. It was trust unraveling. And today, Ethan needed answers. Gone was the polished suit and the confident stride of a restaurant owner. In its place stood a man cloaked in anonymity, jeans faded at the knees, a simple gray t-shirt, and a weathered baseball cap pulled low over his brow. It was a disguise crafted with intention, just nondescript enough that none of his employees would give him a second glance. Today he wouldn't be the boss. He'd be just another face in the crowd. The moment he stepped through the glass doors, a rush of buttery warmth and maple sweetness wrapped around him like an old memory. This place was supposed to be his pride, a symbol of everything he'd built from the ground up. But now, even the air felt off. The entrance hadn't been swept. Crumbs clung to the corners of the welcome mat. The ceiling light flickered overhead like a nervous heartbeat. The hostess, no older than 20, barely lifted her eyes from her phone as she muttered, "Table for 1?" "Yes, please," Ethan replied, masking the disappointment in his tone. Her indifference struck him like a slap, a small but sharp signal that something was festering beneath the surface. She led him to a booth with a perfect vantage point. He could see both cash registers clearly. As he slid into the seat, Ethan took mental inventory of everything. Customer flow, employee behavior, service quality. This wasn't just breakfast. This was an investigation. He ordered blueberry pancakes and a black coffee, then leaned back, observing. 15 minutes passed. Business moved along in routine rhythm. But then something shifted. 2 cashiers, Mike, tall and rough around the edges with a patchy beard, and Jason, shorter with meticulously styled hair, drifted together behind the counter. They whispered. They laughed. Their energy didn't match the pace of a professional morning shift. It was too casual, too familiar. Ethan adjusted in his seat, tilting slightly to catch fragments of their conversation. Every word that followed clawed deeper into his gut. "Man, yesterday was sweet," Jason said, resting a smug elbow on the counter. "That business crowd always tips big when they're in a rush." Mike's eyes darted across the dining room. "Yeah, and they don't notice if the tip never makes it to the jar." Ethan's fork froze mid-air. He blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly, but Jason's next words confirmed it. "The woman in the red blazer? She left a 5 just sitting there. Not my fault if it ended up in my pocket instead of the jar. The others don't need to know." Mike shrugged. "They're making enough anyway." A chill crept through Ethan's bones. He had designed the tip-sharing system to promote fairness, to build camaraderie between the front and back of house. Everyone, from the servers to the line cooks, relied on those tips. They weren't just extra cash, they were lifelines. As a family of 4 approached the counter, Ethan watched with laser focus. The father handed Jason both a credit card and a crisp $10.00 bill. "This is for your tip jar. Thanks again," the man said kindly. Jason's smile was polished, professional. "We really appreciate your generosity, sir." But as the family turned away, Ethan saw it. The sleight of hand, the $10.00 vanished into Jason's apron pocket, bypassing the clear glass jars sitting just inches away. Ethan's hand tightened around his coffee mug until his knuckles turned white. This wasn't an isolated lapse. This was practiced, rehearsed routine. When an elderly couple stepped up next, Mike took the lead. Ethan noted how he angled his body to block the screen, how his fingers danced quickly over the keypad. It was almost graceful in its deception. After they left, Mike leaned toward Jason and murmured, "Easiest $20 I've made today. Register says 15, we got 35. Do the math. Jason chuckled. You're getting good at that. Ethan's jaw clenched. This was worse than he feared. They weren't just stealing tips. They were actively manipulating transactions, pocketing the difference, skimming from the business he had bled to build. Everything all right with your meal, sir? A server asked as she passed by his table. Ethan forced a smile. It's great, thanks. But it wasn't great, not even close. The next words he overheard pierced deeper than theft ever could. Remember that guy Tom? Got fired last month? Jason said casually. The tall dude with the glasses? Mike replied. Management thought he was stealing. Jason smirked. If only they knew. We set him up. Poor guy couldn't even defend himself. Mike laughed. Cold and hollow? Yeah, they ate it up. Ethan sat motionless, heart pounding. He remembered Tom. Quiet, diligent, always on time. The firing had been swift, based on numbers that now made horrible sense. They hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen a man's dignity, shattered his livelihood, destroyed his name. Ethan swallowed the rising rage. Confronting them now would only give them a chance to cover their tracks. He needed evidence. Undeniable, unshakable proof. As his pancakes grew cold, Ethan crafted a plan. Tomorrow, he wouldn't return as a silent observer. He'd return with a trap. He would catch them in the act, not just for the money they had taken, but for the lives they had tried to ruin. But first, he needed to be sure. The next morning, Ethan arrived even earlier, a bitter blend of resolve and unrest driving each step. His disguise was subtly altered, a different cap, plain dark glasses, small changes, but crucial ones. He couldn't afford recognition. Not today. He wasn't here just to observe anymore. He was here to gather hard evidence, the kind that couldn't be disputed, denied, or erased. The night before had been long and heavy. He and his head of security had combed through financial reports deep into the early hours. Together they traced a consistent pattern, a steady drop in tip totals, misaligned with the steady flow of customers, and register records that didn't quite add up. The theft wasn't random. It was precise, systematic. Ethan slid into a booth with a sharper vantage point of the cash registers, this one better aligned with the overhead cameras. His security team had remotely tweaked the camera angles overnight to ensure nothing would be missed. Every corner of the register station would now be visible in crystal clarity. He ordered a black coffee, strong, no frills, and unfolded a newspaper, angling it like a screen. Behind the pages, his eyes stayed locked on the counter. The morning rush began to swell, and Ethan watched as Mike sauntered in, exchanging a knowing glance with Jason. No words were needed between them. They moved in sync, a duo built on trust, twisted by deceit. Tuesdays are good for a little extra pocket change, Mike muttered with a smirk, slipping into position behind the counter. To any passerby, they were the embodiment of efficiency. Polite smiles, quick service, calm in the morning chaos. But Ethan knew better now. The performance was part of the game. Just before 9 a.m., the first theft of the day played out like a sleight-of-hand trick. A man in a suit dropped a $5.00 bill into the tip jar as he waited for change. Mike, ever so casually, reached over to adjust the jar. The motion was smooth, unassuming. When his hand came back, the bill was gone. Ethan marked the moment down. Time, amount, details, everything. By 10:30, the pattern was undeniable. 3 more cash tips vanished, each one swiped with calculated ease. Mike and Jason alternated roles, keeping suspicion evenly dispersed. Ethan could feel the burn in his chest growing. But the tip theft was only part of it. He needed proof of something worse. Register manipulation. Then came the opportunity. A woman stepped up to Mike's register, her brow furrowed and a to-go bag clutched in hand. "This isn't what I ordered," she said. "I asked for banana pancakes, not blueberry." Mike's response was textbook empathy. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me fix that for you right away." He called the order to the kitchen, then turned to the register. Ethan leaned in subtly. Mike's hands flew over the keys, not with urgency, but with intention. It was a complex flurry of movements for what should have been a basic correction. When the woman walked away with her new order, Mike reopened the drawer, ostensibly to organize cash. Instead, he palmed a bill, Ethan guessed a 20, and slid it into his pocket, fixing the register balance. Mike muttered to Jason. Ethan's stomach churned. The brazenness wasn't even masked anymore. Throughout the morning, Ethan tallied 7 more stolen tips and 3 instances of suspicious register adjustments. Each one followed the same script: a customer issue, a distraction, a sleight of hand. But it was what happened next that solidified Ethan's decision. An elderly gentleman, clearly irregular, approached the counter with a kind smile. "This is for the staff," he said, laying a $10 bill on the counter. "The service is always wonderful here." Jason's face lit up with warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Everyone will appreciate that." But as the old man turned, Jason swept the money off the counter and into his pocket in one fluid motion. Not even a pretense of depositing it into the tip jar, just theft. Calm, deliberate, and cruel. A large group entered next, throwing the floor into a brief frenzy. Ethan watched the partners execute a well-rehearsed move. Jason drew the host's attention to table arrangements, while Mike dipped into the register, stuffing a handful of bills into his waistband beneath his apron. Their coordination was impeccable. This was a routine they'd honed like professionals. Later, during a lull, a server glanced at the near-empty tip jar and frowned. "It's weird. We've been packed all morning." Mike shrugged without missing a beat. "People aren't feeling generous, I guess." Jason jumped in, smooth as ever. "Most are using cards today. Those tips go straight to you guys." The server nodded, unconvinced, but too busy to press it further. Ethan, though, caught the exchanged smirks between the two thieves, equal parts relief and mockery. By early afternoon, Ethan had everything he needed. Every theft, every false adjustment, every quiet betrayal was on record. And then, like fate rubbing salt in the wound, came the final blow. A young mother paid for her meal while juggling a squirming toddler and a shoulder bag. She left almost $7 in change on the counter. Another server started to call after her. "Ma'am, you forgot your—" "I got it," Jason interrupted, scooping the bills into his palm. He didn't move to return them. Instead, he laughed, tossed the money into his pocket, and shared a look with Mike. That was it. Ethan's fingers trembled as he reached for his wallet. He paid for his coffee, heart pounding. Above him, the cameras recorded it all. Tomorrow he would return, not as a silent stranger, but as the owner of this place. No more pretending, no more watching. But first, he had one last thing to do. That night, Ethan sat alone in his home office, surrounded by files, screenshots, and financial statements. On his laptop glowed the personnel file of Thomas Warren, the man they had all believed was guilty. Tom's record was flawless. Years of service, glowing reviews, 3-time Employee of the Month. Not a single red flag until the day he was accused of theft. Ethan muttered under his breath, "I should have seen it. I should have questioned it." The termination report looked damning. Register shortages on Tom's shifts, a customer complaint about short change, even a written statement from Mike claiming he'd witnessed Tom pocketing money. But now it was all clear. They had framed him, meticulously, ruthlessly. Ethan picked up the phone and called Sarah Chin, the location manager. "I need everything on Tom Warren's termination. And I need to know exactly how Mike and Jason built that case." The conversation with Sarah was sobering. Mike had first planted the seed of doubt. Jason backed it up with supposed evidence, carefully fabricated footage, manipulated data. They'd created a narrative, convincing enough to fool everyone, including Sarah. "I thought I was protecting the business," she said quietly, guilt thick in her voice. "Mike even showed me register footage. Jason had these spreadsheets. I never questioned them." "They manipulated you," Ethan said, voice low, "and I failed to stop it." After the call, Ethan searched for Tom online. His Facebook told a painful story. Months of job hunting, rejected applications, and quiet desperation. The latest post mentioned new work, graveyard shifts at a 24-hour diner across town. Ethan stared at the screen, his chest heavy. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just be confronting thieves. He'd be fighting to restore a man's name. What Mike and Jason had done didn't just rob Tom of his job. It annihilated his future. Ethan sat in the dim light of his home office, heart sinking as he scrolled through LinkedIn and other networking sites. Tom's profile had gone cold. Connections once proudly listed had quietly disappeared. In the tight-knit restaurant world, news traveled fast. An accusation of theft, even without evidence, was often enough to exile someone. With a clenched jaw, Ethan turned back to the restaurant's internal surveillance archive. He set up a dual-screen display. On one side, footage from Tom's final weeks. On the other, the recent recordings of Mike and Jason. And what emerged was damning. The patterns were identical. Movements, timing, body language. But one truth became brutally clear. Tom had never been the thief. Ethan's breath caught as he discovered a clip time-stamped on the exact day Tom was accused. Mike, not Tom, was at the register. But in the original firing documentation, the angle of the footage had been cleverly manipulated. Just enough blur, just enough misdirection to cast suspicion on Tom. By what did they edit the footage? Ethel Park. Ethan whispered, rage tightening around his chest like a vice. Digging deeper, Ethan found a log entry. Jason had been given temporary admin access to the security system during a week the IT manager had been out. The justification? A minor technical fix. In reality, Jason had used it to erase doctor and reframe surveillance clips, weaponizing the system to destroy a man's livelihood. It wasn't petty theft anymore. It was psychological warfare. Ethan found a customer complaint in Tom's termination file. A woman had reported receiving incorrect change. Cross-referencing with the transaction logs revealed a chilling twist. The cashier that day wasn't Tom. It was Mike. The lie had been threaded so smoothly into the paperwork, even Sarah, the manager, hadn't caught it. Ethan picked up the phone. "Jim, I need every register assignment for the last 3 months. Everything. I want a full picture of when, where, and who." As the pieces fell together, Ethan's fury grew cold and focused. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a calculated dismantling of a man's life. They'd manipulated schedules, faked witness accounts, even coached others to suspect Tom. They hadn't just framed him. They'd manufactured an entire reality where he was guilty. By midnight, the case was airtight. Ethan had enough evidence to not only terminate Mike and Jason but press criminal charges. But as he sat there, surrounded by documents and stills, his hands trembled, not with adrenaline but remorse. What they had done to Tom couldn't be fixed with a pink slip. He opened Tom's file again. The assistant manager promotion had been within reach, and then everything had fallen apart. Ethan considered calling, but he couldn't. Not at midnight, not over the phone. Tom deserved more than a late-night apology from a man who had once believed he was guilty. Instead, Ethan turned to his keyboard. He drafted a detailed email to his legal team, outlining the entire situation and requesting immediate advice on how best to compensate Tom. And then he opened a fresh document and began writing a letter. part apology, part confession. He wasn't just offering Tom his job back. He was offering him the future they had stolen. As he typed, his phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. She had continued her own search after their call. "You need to see this." Attached was a screenshot, a text conversation between Mike and Jason. The date was 3 weeks ago, the day of Tom's termination. Mike: "It worked." Tom's gone. Jason: "Too easy. Manager bought everything." Mike: "Now we don't have to worry about him catching on." Jason: "Did you see his face when they blamed him? Priceless." Mike: "One less problem. Barley's to celebrate." Jason: "First round's on Tom's final paycheck, lol." Ethan's hands shook. The smugness, the cruelty. They hadn't just plotted a frame-up, they reveled in it. He forwarded the screenshot to his lawyers with a single sentence: "I want to make this right." Then he leaned back, eyes heavy but focused. Tomorrow would not be a quiet visit. It would be a reckoning. Morning came sharp and cold, crisp clarity in the air that mirrored Ethan's mood. He barely slept, but it didn't matter. His mind was clear, his mission defined. In the parking lot across from the restaurant, he met Jim Martinez, his head of security. Jim handed him a discreet earpiece. "This'll keep us connected. I'll be monitoring the feeds from the van. Every camera is rolling. Sarah's updated the shift schedule. Mike and Jason are both on." Ethan nodded. "And the coverage?" "Every inch of the register area. Existing cameras and 3 hidden ones I installed before dawn. If they so much as breathe near a dollar bill, we'll have it." This was it. No more shadow games. Ethan would walk in not as a customer, not in disguise, but as the man who owned every inch of that building. But before he acted, he needed one final, irrefutable moment, catching them in the act, in full view, while he was standing right there. "Remember," Jim said through the earpiece, "fresh footage is key. They'll claim the old stuff is doctored, especially since Jason had access to the system. This morning seals it." Ethan checked his watch. It's showtime. He walked into Stacks and Syrup in a tailored navy suit, the company pin gleaming under the lights. His entrance didn't go unnoticed. A young server blinked twice before stammering, "Mr. Cole? We didn't know you were visiting today." "Just a surprise check-in," Ethan replied with a warm smile. "Carry on as usual." He slid onto a counter stool directly across from the registers. Jason and Mike hadn't seen him yet. They were knee-deep in orders, voices polite, movements polished. Sarah appeared a moment later. "Mr. Cole, what a surprise. I can get the quarterly reports." "That won't be necessary," Ethan interrupted gently. "I just want to observe for now. Maybe you can walk me through the floor in an hour?" Sarah nodded, flustered, and disappeared to inform the team. Across the room, Jason noticed Ethan first. His smile froze. He nudged Mike. Both men straightened at once, their posture rigid, their expressions wiped clean. They knew. Jim's voice crackled through the earpiece. "They've spotted you. Jason just texted Mike. Can't read the message from this angle." Ethan sipped his coffee, pretending to chat with a nearby guest. From the corner of his eye, he watched as panic simmered beneath the surface. Now they wait. And then the moment arrived. A businessman stepped forward, clearly in a rush. He handed Jason his credit card and a $20.00 bill. "Keep the change," the man said, already turning away to take a call. Jason hesitated. The $20.00 sat between him and the jar. Ethan could almost see the war inside him, the instinct to pocket it versus the awareness of who was watching. He lingered a beat too long. And then, with forced calm, Jason placed the bill, finally, into the tip jar. But Ethan wasn't fooled. This morning had only begun. Jason dropped the 20 into the tip jar with a forced nod, his eyes flickering toward Ethan in a fleeting plea for approval, or maybe mercy. Ethan held his gaze, returning a thin smile that never touched his eyes. Very interesting, Ethan murmured into his earpiece, keeping his voice casual. Let's see how long that lasts. It didn't last long. 30 minutes later, Ethan set his tablet down with a slow, deliberate motion and excused himself, walking toward the restrooms. He made sure his back was to the registers, appearing entirely absorbed in a mock phone call. But he wasn't alone. Jim was watching from the van, every camera rolling, every whisper captured. "They're talking," Jem's voice crackled softly through the earpiece. "Jason just told Mike coast is clear." Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, pretending to handle an urgent call. He timed his breathing, grounding himself with each inhale as his pulse quickened. "Mike just opened the register," Jim reported. "He's running a refund, but there's no customer, and he just pocketed what looks like 220s. Ethan gave a subtle nod, the kind that only Jim would recognize. Then, calm as ever, he returned to the counter. Mike glanced up, and the smugness on his face vanished the second their eyes met. "Time for phase 2. Ethan pulled out his wallet and approached Jason's register. "To-go coffee, please," he said, placing a $20 0-cent bill on the counter, distinctly separate from his payment. He looked Jason dead in the eye. "This is for your tip jar." Then, turning away, Ethan pretended to take another call, stepping just far enough to give the illusion of distraction, yet close enough to observe. "His eye in the 20, Jim whispered. "He's checking the room, and, yep, he just pocketed it, clear as day on camera 3. Ethan waited another beat, then returned. "I believe I left a tip for your staff," he said mildly. Jason froze. "Oh, yes, sir," he stammered, reaching for the jar. "Thank you." Ethan's voice remained pleasant. "That's odd. I don't see it in there." Jason paled. His hand twitched toward his apron pocket but stopped mid-mouth. I was just about to put it in," he mumbled. With reluctance thick as molasses, he withdrew the bill and dropped it into the jar. "How thoughtful of you to keep it safe," Ethan replied, tone steady, eyes sharp as glass. Before Jason could respond, Ethan moved to Mike's register. "I'll take a muffin," he said smoothly, pulling another 20 from his wallet. He placed it down with intent. "Please make sure this goes into the jar for the entire team. I know how hard everyone here works." Mike nodded with forced enthusiasm. "Absolutely, sir." Jim's voice was hushed but urgent. He made eye contact with Jason, then put it in the jar. "They're spooked. They know something's wrong." Ethan murmured just loud enough for Jim to hear. "Let's make it interesting." He walked away again, this time toward the manager's office. The bait was in place. If they were going to slip, now was the moment. Inside the office, Ethan joined Sarah at her desk. On her monitor, a live view of every camera flickered to life. Jim had patched in remotely. It didn't take long. Mike leaned toward Jason, face tight with worry. "What's he doing here?" Jason shook his head. "I don't know. Just act normal." Their anxiety betrayed them more than their hands ever could. As the lunch rush swelled, Ethan watched them slip. A customer paid with 2 crisp 50s for a $26 0-cent meal. Mike counted back the correct change, but as soon as the customer turned away, his fingers dipped into the drawer and snagged an extra 20. "Got it," Sarah whispered. Her voice trembled with disbelief. "That's theft right there." And then Jason mirrored the move, voiding a transaction and pocketing the difference. Ethan stood. "That's enough," he said quietly. He stepped out onto the bustling restaurant floor, the energy humming all around. But Ethan moved like silence cutting through noise. He walked to the counter, standing squarely before them. "Could I speak with both of you for a moment?" he said, voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. Mike, halfway through another transaction, blinked. "I'm in the middle of..." "It can wait," Ethan said. His tone brooked no argument. "Sarah, please cover the registers." She stepped forward, pale but composed. Mike stepped aside. Jason didn't resist. He looked like he was bracing for a blow. Ethan led them to a quiet corner of the dining room, away from customers but within sight of the staff. "Let's talk about those tips," he began, voice low, eyes unflinching. Mike's face blanched. Jason looked to him for support, but found none. What tips?" Mike asked, the mask of innocence already slipping. "The ones that never made it into the jar. The ones that walked out in your pockets." Jason gave a weak laugh. "There must be a misunderstanding." Ethan didn't flinch. "There's no misunderstanding. I've been watching you both. First, as a customer you didn't recognize, and today as the man who owns this business." The truth hit them like a wave. Mike's mouth dropped open. You were the guy with the newspaper." "I was," Ethan said. "And I saw it all. The missing tips, the phantom refunds, the cash skimming. But what cut the deepest?" He paused, let it sink. "It was Tom." At that name, Jason's face collapsed. Mike went rigid. "We didn't do anything to Tom," Jason blurted out. "David," Ethan snapped. "I've seen the messages, the doctored footage, the setup. You used my trust to destroy an innocent man's life." Around them, staff had begun to gather, drawn by the tension. Ethan turned to Sarah. "Please call everyone together." She did. The lunch crowd had slowed, giving them a window. Employees clustered around, whispering, watching. Ethan spoke into his earpiece. "Jim, join us. Bring the footage." Moments later, Jim entered carrying a laptop and a portable projector. He connected it to a blank wall, and the room fell silent. Footage played, clear as day. Mike pocketing 20s, Jason stealing Ethan's tip. Employees gasped. Some stepped back. Others whispered in disbelief. Mike stumbled. That's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Ethan said coldly. "You stole from the business, from our customers, and worst of all, from your own teammates." He turned to the room. He framed Tom Warren. They made him look like a thief. He lost his job, his reputation, and for weeks, we believed it. The silence was unbearable. But justice, real, honest justice, was about to begin. As the footage played, the mood in the restaurant turned from stunned disbelief to a simmering fury. Ethan watched the shift happen, not just in faces, but in hearts. Where once there had been camaraderie and trust, there was now the betrayal of something deeper. A community had been violated. "You've been stealing our tips?" a young server asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of outrage and pain. "I've been behind on rent for 3 months. We split those tips to survive. You knew that." Another stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "I always wondered why the jar felt so light on weekends. You said customers weren't generous." His eyes locked onto Jason. "You lied. To all of us." Ethan raised a hand to quiet the rising anger. "There's more?" He gave a nod to Jim, who switched the display. Now altered footage played, grainy, strategically cut, time-stamped, the scenes that had cost Tom Warren his job. The staff leaned in, recognizing the narrative they had once believed, and then seeing the truth beneath it. "This is the video used to justify Tom's termination," Ethan said, his voice steady. Jason was granted access to the security system during a routine IT maintenance window. He used that access to doctor this footage, to make it appear that Tom was stealing, when in fact it was Mike at the register. A deep, collective breath filled the room, followed by gasps and murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others clenched their jaws in rage. One of the cooks, a stoic man who rarely spoke, stepped forward. "You got Tom fired? He was the best supervisor we had. He trained half of us, and you threw him under the bus? Mike's defiance collapsed completely. His shoulders sagged under the weight of exposure, no longer able to maintain the facade. Jason, on the other hand, tried one last desperate play. "You can't prove this was intentional," he said, almost shouting. "Cash mistakes happen. That's not illegal." "Save it for the police," Ethan replied, steel lining every word. "The evidence speaks for itself." He turned to Sarah. "Effective immediately, both Mike and Jason are terminated. Please collect their name tags and aprons. They are not to handle any more cash. Escort them to gather their belongings." Quietly. Mike didn't resist. He was hollow now, empty of bluster or bravado. Jason's face twisted with defiance, his final words dripping with venom. "You can't do this. We have rights." Ethan didn't flinch. "Your rights weren't a concern when you violated Tom's. You're fired, whether criminal charges follow. That's up to law enforcement now." As two senior staff members moved to guide the pair toward the back, Ethan faced the team. "I owe each of you an apology," he began, voice tight with sincerity. "As the owner, I failed in my responsibility to protect this team. I didn't investigate soon enough. I didn't question Tom's firing the way I should have. I let you all down. For that, I am truly sorry." The staff, stunned by his honesty, looked at one another in silence. In an industry where leadership often remained aloof, Ethan's accountability hit hard, and it meant something. "Starting today, we're launching new cash handling procedures, new security protocols. This won't happen again, not on my watch. And we will make this right, not just for the business, but for everyone who's suffered because of this." As Mike and Jason were let out, defeated and exposed, Ethan felt the tension in the room begin to shift. Justice had finally arrived, but one piece still remained unfinished. The next evening, Ethan parked outside the quiet glow of Sunrise Diner. The neon buzzed in the early dusk. He clutched a leather folder in one hand. Inside were three things: a formal apology, an offer of reinstatement, and a compensation package his lawyers had finalized that morning. This visit wasn't about punishment. It was about redemption. Inside, the diner was nearly empty. A trucker at the counter, a couple in the corner, and at the far end, refilling salt shakers with mechanical precision, stood Tom Warren. The hunch in his shoulders was new. "Sit anywhere," called the waitress behind the counter. "Tom will be right with you." Ethan took a booth and waited. When Tom turned and saw him, his face darkened with a mix of shock and guarded resentment. He walked over with a coffee pot in hand, his voice flat. "Mr. Cole," he said, "what brings you to Sunrise?" "You do, Tom," Ethan said gently. "If I could have a few minutes of your time." Tom glanced at his co-worker, then set down the coffee pot. "Taking my break, Jenny?" he called. She nodded, and Tom slid into the booth, arms crossed. "If you're here to accuse me of something else," Tom said low and raw, "you can leave. I've got a job now. It's not much, but it's mine." "I'm not here to accuse," Ethan said. "I'm here to apologize." Tom froze. Ethan laid everything out. Mike and Jason's deception, the falsified evidence, the theft, and the confrontation. "You were innocent, and I didn't fight for you," he finished. "For that, I'm deeply sorry." Tom's hands curled into fists. "Do you have any idea what that did to me? I couldn't get hired. I was almost evicted. My girlfriend thought I was lying and left." "I know," Ethan whispered. "And I can't undo that pain, but I can start making it right." He slid the folder across the table. Tom opened it. First the apology, then the compensation offer. His eyes widened at the figure. Then he froze when he saw the final document. "Shift supervisor?" he asked. "You earned that promotion long before this happened," Ethan said, "and we need someone with integrity in that position." Tom stared for a long moment. Then, "Do the other employees know?" "They do. I told them the truth. Many of them said they missed working with you, that they trusted you." A long silence passed. "I did love that job," Tom finally admitted. "It meant something to me." Ethan nodded. "It still can. But it's your call." Tom's eyes flickered down to the documents again, then back up. "I'll come back, on one condition." "Name it." "I want to help redesign the register protocols. No one else should go through what I did." Ethan's smile was soft. "Absolutely." They talked for another 20 minutes. By the time they shook hands, Tom's grip was firm, his shoulders straighter. The weight of injustice had begun to lift. 1 week later, Ethan stood quietly in the corner of Stacks and Syrup, watching the restaurant buzz with life. Tom, now shift supervisor, moved with grace and quiet authority. Staff were energized, customers smiled. The tip jar overflowed. Sarah appeared beside Ethan. "It's like night and day," she said. Ethan nodded, watching Tom laugh with a guest. "Sometimes justice means more than catching the guilty. It means restoring what was stolen. Dignity, hope, belonging." Across the room, Tom caught Ethan's eye and gave a small, appreciative nod. Ethan returned it. This wasn't just a return to normal. It was the beginning of something better, for all of them.